Welcome to A State of Mind, the podcast dedicated to healing, awakening, integration, and the embodied expression of this amazing journey we call life. I'm your host, Julian Royce, and I'm recording this here in my office in downtown Boulder, Colorado, where I work as a trauma somatic therapist, also doing psychedelic therapy, working with couples, and leading groups. And I'm leading a group now in integration. Integration is a key component to psychedelic-assisted therapy and really to working with altered states, meditation, big life experiences, and one's growth in general. So if you're interested in joining this integration group where we learn about integration, different aspects of it, and have the support of a group and a community, please send me a message. Check it out at astateofmindcounseling.org. You can also send me a message to the website, astateofmindpodcast.com, or find me on my social media, which will be linked below. And I'm really excited about today's episode. Today I'm speaking with Mah Ze Tar. Maz is an incredible musician. He is of Iranian or Persian ancestry, and he brings those traditional elements of that traditional music into his music, which is very danceable and bassy and contemporary, and it's a lot of fun. And I first met him in Costa Rica last winter at Envision Festival. And he's not only a great musician, he's a great person. I learned that he's also a psychologist, so we have that in common, and he's working with people. And we cover a lot of topics in our episode today. We talk about the beauty and power of music to bring people together. We talk about what it's like to come from an immigrant family and the pressures to be successful. We talk about the ancient Persian Empire and some of that history with Iran, which is fascinating to me and something I want to learn more about. We talk about somatic therapy, working with our nervous system, processes of integration, the relational qualities of meditation, ideas of self versus no self from Buddhism. We talk about AI and how it is impacting music and the impact it could have in the future. And we talk about this publish or perish mentality in academia that's also felt in the world of music with musicians. And we cover a lot of other topics as well. Oh, and one other thing I want to announce here is if you or anyone you know has been directly impacted by Hurricane Helene or Hurricane Milton, I'm working with some organizations to help provide free or very low-cost trauma therapy. So please send me a message if you are interested in that. And it's good to know that receiving help and support sooner rather than later after difficult, challenging, or overwhelming life experiences will help significantly reduce the risk of developing PTSD later. And if you have been impacted by these storms, please reach out. It's been really sad to see the destruction, the devastation. I grew up in North Carolina. I used to live in Asheville. I went to a yoga teacher training in Asheville, North Carolina. And to see all the destruction and damage happening there it's been really heartbreaking. It's been really sad. And it will take years to rebuild. I trust that we will rebuild, but that area will likely never be the same. And it's just really tough to see so much damage, destruction, even death caused by this storm. It's really the worst hurricane in the history of North Carolina. And now there's a new hurricane as I am recording this hitting Florida. So it's been a tough hurricane season, and my heart goes out to everyone impacted. Again, if you know someone directly impacted, send us a message. I'd love to help. And now, without further ado, I bring you Mah Ze Tar. I'm here today with Maz. Thanks for being on the podcast. It's great to have you on here.
Thanks for having me, Julian. It's an absolute treat. I'm very, very grateful to get to be on this podcast with you.
Yeah, I can see some of your instruments in the background, and your musical project is Mah Ze Tar.
That's right.
And highly encourage people to check it out. I'm going to include some of your music, maybe some video too from you as part of this podcast.
Right up.
Yeah, just to share with people listening, we met at the Envision Festival in Costa Rica, and we were both staying at this yoga retreat center down there. Yeah,
Beautiful.
That's how it was a beautiful place. And that was when I first discovered your music. But I've really appreciated listening to your music since then, and I've played it some in some DJ sets I've done, and it's inspiring.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much. It's a joy to get to share any creative art with other people. So I'm very, very grateful for that.
Yeah. And then I later learned that you're also psychologist. Is that the right term? Psyche and psychology.
Yeah.
We have that kind of thing in common. And then you came and performed at the last event that I had at the community house that I created called the Awareness House here in Boulder, Colorado. And it was a really sweet gathering. It was really awesome to have you there and in a more intimate space. It felt like such a treat and a blessing. And I got some great videos from that too. I'm going to share with more people. So
awesome. Yeah, it's fun playing, I think we had done the Fox Theater it's always nice just before that, and it's always nice playing, in venues, but there's something really nice about those intimate settings, and when it's curated well, and you get to just connect and see people. It feels very warm. So
Yeah, it can be more warm, open-hearted, more relaxed, I think. That's
yeah,
part of what I like
exactly.
about it. Yeah.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, there's something special about being in a home and having, like, a home experience like that I really appreciate.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, yeah, do you wanna share with us some of your journey? I'm curious to learn
Yeah,
more about
man.
you and your life path.
Totally. So, my name is Maz. My project is called Mah Ze Tar, which is an old Sanskrit name. It's a Zoroastrian name. Mah means moon, Ze
Mm,
means wood, and Tar means string. So guitar, sitar, tar is a old Sanskrit word for string, and also a Farsi word. And so my original name is Mah Ze Tar. I just go by Maz. Mah Ze Tar. So Mah Ze Tar is a friend of the moon. Yar means friend. And so I just slightly changed that and kind of getting into that cultural reality. I'm a second generation Iranian. And so my parents were born in Shiraz in Iran, which is the southern part of Iran, which is where the Persepolis and all the ancient Persian ruins of the Persian Empire are kind of based in. And I was born here in the United States. My parents came here before the Iranian Revolution in 1979.
mm,
And so they kind of, were immigrants and in some ways refugees to some extent. My dad was a surgeon and he was practicing here and grew up here and got to go back and forth a little bit. I come from a family of musicians. My father was a musician. He's passed on now. My brother was a musician. He's passed on now. Another brother who's a musician. My sister is also a musician. And we all have kind of a dual reality where my older brother is an incredible jazz pianist and composer, and he's an MD, he's a doctor. And my sister is a musician also. She's a psychologist. She has a PhD in psychology, and I'm also a musician. I'm the most active musician in terms of performance in my family. But I also studied psychology because in Persian culture and any culture of diaspora, there is a sense of fear. You're kind of in a new country, and there's this sense that in order to be equal with the people around you with the dominant culture, you either have to have a lot of money or a really good education. So usually both. So a lot of Persians are either lawyers or doctors and whatnot. A part of it is a love for education, but the bigger part of it is seeking safety in a novel land.
mm.
So I grew up being very serious about the music, but it was never really the only path that I could take. But I grew up playing since I was 4 or 5 years old, a lot of traditional Persian instruments. My teens got into Indian music and Near Eastern music, and I've kind of continued on that journey with that while also doing psychology and clinical work.
Beautiful, that's amazing. Yeah. I didn't realize your whole family, so many musicians, and
Yeah, it's a blessing. It's a blessing. Yeah, I learned early on from my father, and
was he giving you music lessons?
we were singing. Yeah, I was a singer and pianist, so we started with that, and then my parents put me in violin class. So in Persian culture, similar to Indian culture, they don't really want you to learn the traditional music. So there's this elitism around learning Western music. So they put,
Mm,
it's like, you teach your kids violin and piano. This means that you're kind of modernized and evolved in some ways. But so they put me in violin lessons, and I hated it. I hated violin
huh,
so much. And went to Iran one year visiting, and I was listening. We went to a traditional kind of restaurant, and there were these traditional musicians, and one of them was playing the Persian ney, which is this really beautiful kind of. It's one I often play in my performances. It's a reed. It's a long interdental flute. And I was listening. I was 6 years old, and I just began crying because it was so beautiful. And I
mm,
told my mom that that's what I want to learn. And so I was kind of, me and one of my brothers were the only ones that went towards the traditional musicking route. But it was definitely something that was always in my consciousness of how deeply these, traditions that have these beautiful musics, they want you to learn Western music. Some probably internalized colonialism to some extent.
Interesting. Well, you also, well, first of all, I just want to appreciate how many instruments you have. I think before we started recording, you said you have 100 instruments or something like
I
that.
have a lot. Yeah, it's an
What is
obsession.
that?
It's a joy and a problem.
I love that. Yeah. But can you say the name again of the reed instrument you just mentioned? Because I'm
It's
not.
called the nave, and I probably have quite a few. Here, let me just grab one and show you.
Yeah.
So it's this really cool instrument called the nave,
Beautiful.
and it's a reed, right? And the
Well, yeah.
weird, it's one of two flutes in the world. There's only two that are interdental. It means it goes in between your freaking teeth, like this. And
Oh, cool. Love
it's
it.
nice. It's also a very important instrument in Sufi music, the
Cool.
music of Rumi
Oh, amazing.
yeah.
Well, it's great to hear a word like interdental outside of a dentist office. Well,
Yeah.
you just shared so many interesting things, but one of them kind of maybe a kind of internalized colonialism around learning Western music, violin, piano, but also a kind of elitism within the Persian culture towards their music, where they're trying to kind of protect it, or they don't want everyone to be able to play it, or am I?
It's interesting. It depends on where you go and what class you're in. So my father was a surgeon, and so he was a doctor, and so he was considered to be a part of the elite social class. And so that class is very much about, rejecting traditionalism, right? It's about embracing Western ideas of dominance and of beauty. And so in that sense, it's kind of like, yeah, that's for like the lower people, the people in the low, the poor people or the people of average society, they play that music. And then when you go into the people who are the keepers of the culture and the art, it's a very sacred thing, and there is a lot of gatekeeping in different ways. There's gatekeeping by largely, scaring the students about how much time and energy it's going to take. That unless they're going to do it seriously, don't get in, to that route. So it depends on what class you're in
Interesting.
that way. Yeah, but in terms of the direct response to your question, it's not gatekeeping on that level. It's a rejection of culture and an embracing of that which was presented, especially during the kingdom before this current, crazy religious fanatics. It was very a Western imperial culture, largely influenced by British colonialism.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. There's so much there. Was I don't Iran was it a colony? It was never quite a colony of Britain, though, was it?
It never was a quite. You could call it like an arm.
An
It was
arm.
like Britain. Yeah, it
Okay.
was like one of the ways in there are different countries in the Middle East, right? There's different, we have particular influence over countries, and they're kind of an extension to something. And what happened was that there was a movement in 1951 to completely cut out the British influence, British and U.S. influence, and it worked. The new prime minister Mossadegh was elected, and there was a big campaign by the CIA at the time to actually overthrow him and bring the king back. So that was a large part of what led to the 1979 revolution, was people's frustration with the amount of suffering and the amount of Western colonial power that had been, so to speak, granted. Um,
Yeah.
Really, yeah.
Yeah. It's fascinating and some sadness and some parts stuff there. But the CIA, I mean, it's been talking with a friend of mine the last few days about there's so much dark history in our country with the CIA in particular. And I was saying, like, if I became president, not that that is going to happen, but that we need like a national reconciliation and a way to acknowledge and apologize for some of the crimes that our own government perpetuated. And the CIA like did all kinds of crazy, terrible things. But so then there was called the Shah, right? He was the king of Iran, and we
Yeah, that's
helped
right.
reinstall him, and then that helped lead to the 1979 was it revolution,
Yes,
and then that's
exactly.
been not what we wanted, and I assume not what a lot of people in Iran truly want either. It's an extreme religious fanatical movement, right?
Yeah, yeah. Great points there. I mean, one of the things is that a lot of what we're experiencing right now with what's currently happening in the Middle East and what's currently happening in Central America and what's currently happening, they're the ripple effects it's like you hit a rock like this, and then all of a sudden there's a domino effect, that's been happening. But what happened in Iran was before the kingdom of the Shah. It was a rather religious, extreme space. Women were super oppressed, but this is like the time where like women couldn't vote in America. It's like 1910, 1915. Post World War One, this guy Reza Shah, the father of the Shah, took power. He was a good guy, very powerful guy. He was a good guy in the sense that he was like, we're going to move this country forward. So women's rights in gnarly ways that go and rip off the hijab off of women's heads. My grandma remembers this is a very extreme way of like, we're fully rejecting this Islamic oppressive culture. He built the railroads, school systems, and by the time his son had taken over, Iran was the most educated, most egalitarian country in the Middle East in terms of women's rights. Women, had equal pay. They could be in positions of power, police force, things like that. And what kind of some people speculate is that transition from this really extreme oppressive Islamic culture to this very free, liberated, and look at pictures of Iran in 1970s, was just so vast. It was like the spine just like it flexed a little too hard to where it just cracked, and then all of a sudden people were like, they're who are we? It was a crisis of identity, right? In the same way you're working with somebody who might have dissociative identity disorder, particular a disorder of identity, or a challenge of identity, or a disorganization of identity. There is a crisis. There's a moment of crisis. There's a moment of psychosis, which is what led to this collective kind of blowing up of choosing now what was safe, what was familiar generationally in the DNA of these people. This is who we are. We're not this, whitewashed American, seeing our women being all naked and all this stuff. Is like all of a sudden there was this reversion to that
Mm,
was new to some extent. This is one speculation. It's a lot more
yeah.
complicated than that. So some people did want it, but a lot of people didn't. They just knew they didn't know what they want. They just knew what they didn't want,
Mm,
right? And the Khomeini regime was actually kind of instilled by the British Empire, because they said if we're not going to have influence over this region, then we don't want basically it's much better to put someone in power who we know is just chaotic and is going to lead this country down to rubble than
uh,
having somebody who would be independent and could actually gain a lot of power outside of any influence of the West. So it
uh,
was kind of, in some ways, some people speculate, and there's some good documentation about that it was partially orchestrated by Western powers, the installation of.
that's that's fascinating. I haven't heard that last piece that you just shared, so I want to learn more about it, and that's really interesting. But that
Absolutely.
that reaction, action, reaction, and um, yeah, it's just interesting. I mean, if we zoom out a little bit farther, since we're on the subject, if you want to share a little bit, I mean, the Persian Empire is such an ancient, rich history, so much art, so much music, really its own center of culture, the way we would talk about India as a center and fount of culture, and Persia and Greece, ancient Rome. Like, I kind of see it in that realm, if that makes sense. I mean,
That's it. Thanks for acknowledging that, for knowing that, for being curious about that. This kind of curiosity is so important in this time. Yeah. So the Persian Empire was considered a superpower during the ancient times. So you had the Egyptians, the Romans, the Greeks, and the Persians were definitely a big part of that. If you look at the Persian Empire map, it expanded from India, right, all the way over to the Balkans, past the Balkans to what we consider Eastern Europe. And that whole region was considered the Persian Empire. It happened for a few reasons. So Cyrus the Great, who was like the main king, like the big boss dude, he was like a pretty cool guy, as far as history writes. We don't really know, but he created the first cylinder of human rights, right, which is in the United Nations. It was the first written document that's still preserved. That
wow.
was like, hey, like, you can't, and slavery's wrong, so on. And he freed the Jews, right? This is in the Torah. This is one of the stories, and blah, blah, blah. But there was that, and then the installation of a road system, in
Hmm,
addition to the installation of money, a
hmm,
currency that could be used across. And then one of the coolest things, freedom of religion. So you didn't actually
amazing.
have to be right? So a lot of like Islam is a great example. They take over expansion while giving, right? So this Persian Empire had this really amazing, great history, and one of the reasons why I do what I do with this music, with Persian music and this Bay stuff, is like I want to bring the beauty of that music forward and to connect people and be interested about these histories because it is so powerful. It is so powerful to be able to know that, right? Like when I was in high school, we studied, our history class was called Western Civilizations.
Hmm.
We didn't really learn about Indian, empires or Persian empires or anything like that. It was very much influenced around that because there's a lot of power. And one of the really scary things about the Shah that was really scary for the United States and Britain in particular is he started really reconnecting with that ancient Persian history. So he changed the date system to how old the Persian Empire is. So it was like 2,567. And there's something really powerful. And that's why it was scary in realigning with these historical civilizations that have so much power, that have so much presence in the collective consciousness. And so, yeah, it was powerful. And also, it was an amalgamation. This is another thing, right? This is the conundrum of identity. So, oh, there's a Persian empires. And most, there's a funny joke. A lot of Persians are like, yo, man, like, oh, that, like, we made that. We brought that. There's ethnocentrism that happens when we start not see the interdependence of these things, right? So, Persian Empire was an amalgamation of everything that came before it.
Yeah.
And all the different cultures and all the different incredible civilizations that existed in the Levant. And what the Persian Empire at that time was really incredible at doing was Persianizing things. So they would take a particular architectural style, right, and then they would Persianize it. They were very good at creating fusion of different cultures, fusion of different ideas. And that was one of their superpowers in a lot of ways. But it was absolutely an amalgamation of the cultures that were in modern day Syria, the Levant, and that whole region. So it is a much more complicated conversation around identity and what does it mean to be a Persian empire, right? Because it was not, these borders are definitely poorly defined.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's good to bring that perspective in. It's kind of like the more we want to zoom in, the more complicated it gets.
Exactly. Exactly.
But yeah, it's good to touch on the history and just appreciate it and hope that things move in a good direction there. There can be some more balance with it all.
Yeah,
So,
man. Me too.
I
Me
mean,
too.
yeah. Have you been to that part of the world?
I've been in Iran. Yep. It's been 22 years now, 23 years since I've been, maybe more 24. It's been a long time. But the last memories I have of it was probably 9 or 10 years old. And it was a beautiful place. There's a lot of beauty in Iran. I've been a little bit, to some of the countries around Turkey.
Yeah.
It's really, really magical, but it's also just so sad. I can't go there now. Energetic, having family, cousins, uncles there that are just suffering, just limitations of resources, oppression. And in that mind, I didn't quite understand it. But as I've gotten older, it's like looking back at my experience, I'm like, wow, like, yeah, it's really beautiful. Like, but it's also just seeing the diaspora and people suffering and people who you have a blood connection with. Like, it's really hard, it's really,
That's tough.
yeah, that's beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. It's one of the most, if you look at these YouTube channels or Instagram channels of travel, these people who go to Iran have an incredible time. The people are very warm. They're incredibly friendly. There's history in every piece of the goddamn streets. It's beautiful. But if there's always different layers, right? I went to Japan and this experience was like, oh, this is amazing. It's if you look just a little bit more underneath the surface and you start looking at the workaholism and the rates of suicide and the other ways in which these people are suffering. So it depends on what layer you want to look at it.
Yeah. That's a great perspective to share. And of course, we could say the same thing about this country. A lot of suicide here, a lot of drug addiction here, a lot of workaholism and problems and materialism and people feeling isolated and alone and cut off. And that's been, part of my passion has been to do my part to create community, to bring people together. That's why I created that community house. And I've just discovered that as much as I love meditation, mindfulness, yoga, breathwork, whatever, I've just discovered the reality of like music as a force that brings people together in a peaceful, open-hearted, connected way. It's like there's nothing else like it. I mean, sometimes when I go to a concert, I'll take a moment and I'll look around and I'm like, wow, there's 1,000 people, 5,000 people, 20,000 people if it's a big thing, and we're all peaceful and we're all in each other's presence. And it's actually music that's bringing that, at least in this country, in this culture, in this time and place.
Oh,
Music is what does that.
all over, man.
Yeah.
It's a great segue into talking about music, psyche, culture, soul, connection. I think like this is where like I'm always fascinated. Like every tradition or religion that almost every single or medicine like circles, and music is an integral part of all of them, whether it's from the Gregorian chants, right, or whether it's in doing Icaros, or whatever it is just an integral part of the collective human experience, and it's powerful. And you know who realized that? Islam. Why? Because they outlaw music. Music is haram in Islam.
I didn't know
And
that.
if you listen, absolutely, if you listen to the chanting that they do of the Quran, it is one of the most beautiful, most melodic, most musical things. But the playing of musical instruments or the singing of songs that are not religious is absolutely haram. Why? Because it's the only thing that could compete with them. It's the only thing that can compete with religion. Because what does religion try to take ownership of and take monopoly of? Peace, connection, community, these exact things that you're speaking of. Now here you're at a Red Rock show or something, listening to some and then you're feeling this sense of connection, this sense of joy, this sense of peace. It's a very, very, very powerful, powerful tool that humanity has been using for a long time, also for war and battle. It's not all good vibes, right? It also, to get the drums and get people pumped up to go kill each other. Like, it's a powerful tool. How we use it is interesting, right? But what we know is that it is unlike anything else that we have access to, and it's freaking weird and cool.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. It's interesting. I haven't really cognized that, taken that in about music in Islam. I guess it's not a huge surprise, but I guess while we're on the subject, I'm just curious, like say someone's listening to this and we hear different things about Iran in the media, and some people are, oh, it's the worst regime ever, and some people are like, well, we're oppressing them. But could you just speak? I just wonder, like the actual lived experience, like the average person there. It's a pretty oppressive place. Is that fair to say?
It's very fair to say. I'll tell you this. I'll tell you that the majority of people in Iran living in Iran, and almost the significant majority, if not 99.9% of the people living outside of Iran, want this regime decimated. Okay? Because it's not just oppression, it's not just the lack of freedom and rights. It's that these people are psychotic. It's that you're basically you're giving people who have collective psychoses. You see, theology and politics, there's a reason for why those two things don't work really well. And even separation of church and state, it's still not really the case. But there has been a clear push for it. Hey, look, there's something about when theology gets mixed with politics, it gets a little dark. And so it's kind of like that. So I would say that it is. Is it a beautiful country? Are the people beautiful? Absolutely. Is there a lot of really cool people? Absolutely. Are there a lot of misled people who are really poor and are getting food stamps, who are fully going out and supporting this regime? Yes. But at the end of the day, most of those people, they want the basic capacities to be able to have access to basic meals and be able to have access to security. I'll just give one example to kind of bring my point home. Is Iran is So in addition to the suppression and oppression and all that shit, there's also just like really heavy financial difficulties, right? So one
Mm.
of the ways, like, if you ever have any Persian friends or you go to your Persian friends, home or something, they're just like always like putting a bunch of food, mom, like,
Yeah.
forcing you, like, come on, eat. You're like, I'm fucking full, man. It's like, no, you gotta eat, and it's like this really funny situation of just, it's a very giving culture. And that's the way that love is shown is through food.
Mm.
But in Iran, meat has gotten so expensive, upwards of $20, $25 a pound,
Wow. No way.
that yeah, that people cannot afford to eat meat.
Mm.
And the next part is that they cannot afford to have gatherings
Oh,
because that is just it's so you can't invite somebody over unless you're going to be able to create a cornucopia of goods. So what it does is that when you have these financial challenges, it's not even about the religious stuff and the oppression. It's just that this government is not fit to rule. They're not fit to be able to have power and control in that region.
oh, thank you. Thank you for speaking to that so clearly, from someone in your shoes to be able to say that. And that's sad. It's sad to hear about. And, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're not fit to rule. I mean, they're not providing for the people there.
That's the main thing. I mean, but then you look at Saudi Arabia, of course, Mohammed bin Salman's an asshole and all that. And, a killer or whatever the hell. But they're good, man. Like, they got a lot of money. Like, people who are in Saudi Arabia, for the most part, are pretty wealthy. Like, women, like, the big news in Saudi Arabia was that women can finally drive. They can get a
Right.
driver's license, 5 years ago. But we're not hearing all this shit about it because the people are fed and they're happy, right? So,
Right.
in terms of the suppression of people and women, Iran is not it's actually not the worst. Some of the Arab countries are significantly worse, but it's just that they have access to a lot of those oil resources, and they're not funding other organizations like these terrorist organizations that Iran is funding, and so they actually have money for the people. Like, you get
Right.
stipend if you're a Saudi national, you get a stipend every month. Like,
It's a
so
good
I
point. Yeah. Yeah, I have a friend from Jordan, and she was sharing with me, like, people in this country are celebrating that women can drive in Saudi Arabia, but what we're not hearing is that the law specifies that a male family member needs to be sitting next to them while they drive. So it's not like freedom.
so terrible, man. It's just so terrible, Yeah, exactly. And like you have to get permission, and patriarchy's real, and it's more real in certain places for sure.
Yeah. If we come back to your music and what you're bringing,
Right on.
some
Right
of
on.
it's coming from this Persian music, from this traditional music, and that
Absolutely.
and that predates Islam. Is that accurate?
Yeah, man. Yep. Yep. So, um, Persian music is a very old music. It's an amalgamation of many cultures, right? So that's the thing, is that nothing is pure. This concept of purity is fucking bullshit, and like
Mm.
Ravi Shankar is a great example. Like, the sitar was 1,000 years or 2,000 years old, and is from the Vedas. Absolute bullshit. The sitar is 180 years old in its current rendition.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
But that is the role, right, of music, is to create this idealization of purity, right, and this exotic experience of ancient Indian culture. So I can't sit here and say, oh yeah, Persian music is thousands of years old. The roots, the instruments that I'm playing, some of the melodies, some of the ideas, probably most musicologists and ethnomusicologists agree, dates back to the Sumerian Empire. There's an image of an oud 5,000 years ago. So, how was it tuned? What scales did it play? We don't really know. That's all speculation, right? But it is a very, very, very old tradition, and it's an amalgamation of many, many different cultures over time. And what happened, and so there was this Ottoman courts, right? So Ottoman is modern day Turkey. They were a huge empire that expanded all the way through the Balkans and east, through Turkmenistan and whatnot. They were like the first creators of fusion music. So in their courts, they had like Indian, Greek, Persian, Egyptian composers coming together and creating these beautiful pieces of music. But what happened is that it kind of like created this hodgepodge. And in the 1800s, 1850s, these different cultures had to like be like, this is our music. And they're like, no, this is Turkish music. Like, the Arabs like, this is Arabic music. So there was this like really interesting you could perhaps call it a battle for identity, of like, this is our music, and that's yours, and this is, and so Persians, what we know of Persian music now, of it being codified with the current instrumentation, is about 170 years old in terms of its current rendition. We don't have recordings.
Right.
We don't have written music because that's oral tradition, meaning that it's passed down from me to you. So you have a name in front of you, and I go, and you go, no, listen closer. So this is the way we learn music,
Right.
and or we're singing. This is the way. Just it's very relational, and the whole time, hours you do this. So because of that, we don't have written music in the same way that we have in Western classical music, dating back to 1500s, 1600s. So is it ancient? Are these instruments technically from that region? Absolutely. Are the scales that I'm playing probably used in those regions for many, many thousands of years? Probably. But again, it's an amalgamation.
I love how knowledgeable you are. I didn't realize that going into this conversation. Like, you really study this, you know a lot about it, and yeah, it's beautiful to reflect on. I think it's important to reflect on because I really believe what you're sharing about the amalgamation and all these influences coming together, and it's like that's human history, like that's human culture, like the history of humanity are people meeting each other and sharing ideas and practices.
That's it. That's it. And there's this joy of identity. There's this safety of this is me and this is mine. And there's this beautiful joy of like, yeah, it kind of is. It's kind of not. That's how I'm more joyful. And that's been influenced by my own practice with Vipassana and Buddhism and having, understanding like, not, that world, which we could get into. But I will say, like, when I'm presenting my music, I'm like, okay, guys, what I like to do in my performance, so it's all electronic, kind of bass inspired, heavy trap kind of bass music with heavy traditional stuff. Like everything I'm playing is of the tradition, all the instrument stuff of the vocal. I'm composing it, or borrowing some stuff from the canon. But for the most part, like, I have to present it as like, now we're going to get into the Persian section. We do the thing, and then we go like, now we're going to go to this journey to India, and then we get into the Indian, do the sitar raga stuff, which I studied very seriously for about 20 years. And then we get into the Greek stuff, which I have my buddy Dros Alexander, who me and him study Greek, and we go to Greece and study the music of Epirus, which is the northwestern region of Greece. So we have these different things so I have to present it that way because that's my identity as a performer, right? Is people want to hold on to something. Say, well, this is kind of Persian music, we're going to go into this thing we think is, it doesn't work because one of your jobs as a performer is to create an idealized state of experience for the listener. Now, I try to really fuck with that in terms of being really silly and weird and kind of like not putting on this, like, okay, now we're going to do Persian music, right? And but just kind of allowing for the sacred silly to be able to play, to kind of trip people out and make them question, like, is this guy, like, is he cool? Like, is he, oh, that's so cool. Oh, wait, what? It's creating this play of idealization and breaking that, because I think that it's in the same way. It's like so beautiful. Like, this is what it is. And like, it's kind of not, it's that kind of ayoka sacred play between these different concepts and these different idealizations and projections that people have, which is what you're always working with.
I love that. Yeah, that's well said. And you make a point to present a specific type and honor that at the same time, while you're bringing in these modern, or I don't know if modern's the right word, but contemporary elements, electronica.
And the last piece to that, Julian, absolutely is that the reason for why I'm curious and I'm doing this play is to help connect with people because I love this music so much. And Mah Ze Tar is branded as a project for cultural preservation through the modernization of this music. Because look, man, I love this stuff. I love traditional music, but I love a good beat and I love to dance.
Yeah.
And then I realized that and a lot of the music now that's getting bigger and expanding is what we call system music. Meaning that, look, like these epic like songs like Close Your, Alice or whatever, like if you click play on like a little stereo, like that's cool. But you bring it in a system and you hear when you hear that sub, it starts hitting, right? So I think that as a traditional musician, this fusion is trying to bring this music in context with this massive system ideology that like brings the beats and the bass. Because if you can connect with the body, it
Hmm.
bypasses the mind, right? You understand this with somatic,
Yeah.
is that
Yeah.
there's a way of bypassing the mind, and that's why it's so important for the music that I make or the collaborators that I work with to create music that is a movement, or even if it's slow. I still want people to get it to move, because if you can move with it, doesn't matter what you're playing, what you're singing. So, oh, that's pretty cool. Like, what was he doing? He's Persian. Oh, that's cool. There's a way in which you can kind of connect with people. So that's the last piece there.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. That's beautiful. It's true, like the live music experience, I think is what you're speaking to, like when you're there with the big sound system, all the people there, and it's so different than listening to it on your earbuds on your phone. It seems like music today, I mean, there's not a lot of artists making money selling their albums, right? It's most artists are making money from live performances, and people are willing to show up and pay for that because it's a unique experience that you can't create on your own. Um,
And probably this is 70 to 90% of income for musicians is through live performances and merch.
oh, yeah,
Yeah,
beautiful.
absolutely right.
Yeah, yeah, and I remember, yeah, getting people dancing. I mean, it's interesting with the technology piece too, and bringing that in. But to see it as actually keeping the tradition alive in a sense, keeping it contemporary, keeping it relevant, keeping it going.
That's exactly right. And getting to the somatics, right? You do some somatic work yourself,
Yeah,
and you understand the power of the body, right? Like there's something so powerful about bringing people into their body, right? And a lot of the times when I've played in like halls, concert halls, which I do and I've done a lot, it becomes this historicized music, like, oh, they're playing this. And people love it, but they can't always connect to it. It's like you leave them they're kind of left in the dust because like there's not a lot of context for what's happening. You go to a raga concert, and for the first hour, the dude's doing alap, which is a series of very slow da re no. For an hour, you just hear it with a drum. What the fuck is this guy doing, right? Or you're like, whoa, And so it's easy to lose people in some ways in those settings, but more importantly, I think it becomes dead. It becomes historicized. It's like in a museum. It's the historical societies that are hiring you. But in this way, it's alive, and like people are having fun. They're like tripping with their friends. They're like, this
yeah.
is sick. Like, I love that. It's like I want to keep this stuff alive. I don't want it to just be a historical museum piece.
Yeah, I love that. I appreciate that so much. And it's the embodied piece. I think the bass is really helping people be in their bodies, the dancing, the movement. It's an
Space,
embodied.
space.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Totally, man.
Love that.
And tell me about your somatic work. What is it what kind of stuff do you, because I know you're a therapist, you're saying you do
Yeah.
some breath work as a part of your.
Yeah. New breathwork, guided meditations that help people connect with their body, feeling their body, really helping people learn how to navigate their own nervous system, understand that your experience is your nervous system. And I don't know, one analogy that I've used, it's not maybe not the perfect one, but like you're driving a car, you have a gas and a brake. And in terms of working with our body, like we can learn how to increase our intensity or downregulate, upregulate or downregulate. And um, yeah, I mean,
That's
ideally we find I think an integration, the top down and bottom up, and we can
yeah,
conceptually understand and also have the felt experience and bring those together. Um,
yeah,
but so
yeah. That's very beautifully said. And when I first got exposed to somatic ideas of psychology, I just totally blew it off. I was super into, just a lot of humanistic psychology and all this stuff. I was like, what the hell are they talking about the body, and it wasn't until I got more and more steeped into meditation traditions, in particular Vipassana Buddhist practice, that I realized, like, oh my God, there's so much going here. And one of my professors, and I mean, now I use it with every client I have. We always start with a particular kind of somatic exercises,
oh,
and
nice.
they said that nervous systems are contagious,
Huh.
and I love that. Is that like if you're in the room with someone who's like calm and down regulated and present and in their body, it helps you to kind of regulate and be in your body.
Mm.
And if you're in the room with someone who's like really like they're super amped up and they're just like, ah, like it immediately makes you anxious, right? Even in that moment, you may have felt a moment. So it's interesting how much of a role there's a relational quality to the somatic regulation as well. And so the more we
Yeah.
can become practitioners of regulating, not always staying, right? It's important to kind of be able to titrate between the two. But the more control we're able to have over regulating, I think it's also collectively healing,
Yeah.
larger social level too.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Yeah, we need that balance. I mean, our culture is so centered around the thinking and our mind, and this kind of mind body split, I think, is so prevalent. So that's cool. I didn't know that you were also. I mean, do you want to share about your journey with psychology?
Sure, sure, absolutely. One of the things that people often ask me right off the bat, "Oh, have you ever thought about like combining the two, like doing music therapy?" And it's just like it's a big hell no from me. There's people who are doing the sound healing, and that's great. But I like to keep these two things separate. Like my understanding of psychology affects the way that I like make a set.
Mm,
I'll go from like really slow, regulated stuff, like really intense, hit a peak of complete chaos and intensity, and then bring it back down to something. I'm using these ideas of somatic regulation through the way that I'm making the music and what I'm sharing and how I'm but I don't really want to have a relationship to the two because the two feed each other, man. So psychology has been a huge, huge interest of mine since I was a teenager. First and foremost, being fascinated by the psychedelic experience. I took psilocybin when I was 15 years old and continued on taking a variety of psychedelic substances, and it made me fascinated, um, and I was very curious about the human potential movement at the time.
yeah.
And I think for some of us, that's one of the areas for some people, it's the fascination with disorder. For me, it was the fascination with human potential, and where can we go? And all the stuff that was happening at Esalen, some of the stuff that was happening in Gestalt with Fritz Perls, and that stuff was fascinating. And then getting into Indian mysticism, right? And the Beatles and that whole movement with Maharishi and all that, made me
Yeah.
really curious. Like, oh, this is cool. Like, there's this space for psychology that is not just focused on disorder, but it's focused on human potential,
Yeah.
right? So I'm super into that. And I went on, I did my undergrad in UC Santa Barbara and continued to do my graduate program in Santa Barbara through Antioch, which was kind of rooted in more social justice oriented approaches to psychotherapy. And it was right next to um, one of the schools there that is largely kind of a Jungian and school of psychology, and so we had some teachers that were Jungian analysts. So we got kind of different approaches, and at the time I was doing a lot of Vipassana. I was doing like 1 or 2 10-day silent retreats and getting really into my own exploration of
Yes.
my own potential and what is the capacity to be present, what is the capacity to be able to have these expansive experiences and whatnot. And it was a really beautiful time in my life. And as I got a little bit older and a little more steeped in psychology, doing my internships in low income clinics, which you may have, this was a
Mm,
big, really, really having a direct experience with suffering,
mm,
like, it really was humbling for me. It was like, wow, like, it took me away from like, what is this fascinated idealization of psychology is this thing that can like, take us to these extreme states of enlightenment and self-actualization. Like, how the fuck do I work with someone who has dissociative identity disorder?
right.
Like what, and really having a very
That's an
direct.
intense. That's an extreme thing. Did you have experience working with people?
I that is my specialty. That is the
Oh, I
one thing
didn't.
that most of my large part of my practice that is built around people who have dissociative identity disorder, because it was ended up becoming one of my specialties because it was so fascinating. I slowly became more and more interested in acute psychological experiences that had identity at their core.
Mm,
And I did my dissertation on mindfulness-based practices, particularly relational. So that was a huge fascination of mine. I was working in laboratories. We were looking at how like mindfulness practicing. This is a big study with Michael Mrazek at the Meta Lab, Memory, Emotion, Thought, and Awareness Lab in Santa Barbara. It was like, how do we use mindfulness can mindfulness practice in a 6-week course increase GRE scores, right? And then like that idea started going to like, can we make like our military like better marksmen by like using mindfulness meditation practice, right? So one of these ideas that was presented in my dissertation is like meditation, Buddhism, mindfulness, these things come in through a funnel and integrate within the larger culture, right? So it's like hyper individual culture that's like always rooted in like growth and getting faster, and getting smarter, and remembering better, and doing things better, and making more money. And so like that's kind of how mindfulness is being marketed.
Yeah.
And I my dissertation was like, what are the relational qualities? Like what, when we look at meditation, long-term meditation, people who experience meditation, practice meditation, experience meditators, what are the relational? Because at the end of the day, in Buddhism, it's about the sangha, it's about the community, it's about
Yeah, that's right.
moving away from hyper individualism, if anything, right? So it bastardizes this particular practice, and it's like, let's do that. So I was like super into mindfulness, relational qualities like emotional regulation and conflict resolution. Those are like the two main constructs that I identified as being mediated by mindfulness practice, which are the pillars of having healthy relationships, being able to regulate your emotion and being able to resolve conflict. So I like kind of took it to that end of things. But what was the core of my questioning through my graduate school and still is identity, right? Self, right? Like concept of ego, of like, who are you? Who is Julian? Am I, right? And we start to like this, study disorders of memory, like HM, this guy who like couldn't remember the past and couldn't project the future. And he's like eternally present. And it's kind of hell. You don't present all the time. Yeah. Everything is chaotic. Like you don't, like memory is amazing, right? The fact that we can actually mind wonder and think about all these things. So coming back, and I'll stop in just a second. I know I'm talking a lot. I started working with these more extreme states, and still having a desire to be able to go and explore these kind of more humanistic, human potential movement oriented practices. But it actually really grounded me down. I worked for many years with trans clients who were going through transition, and then up where I live now in Sebastopol, there's a clinic here in Monterey, and called the Russian River Clinic. And they specialize. There's two people there that are kind of two of the big hotshots in the U.S. that practice with the DID, dissociative identity disorder. So I got into really working in that world. And coming back to the very first statement is I like to keep these two worlds very separate. Like I love going out to festivals and seeing the best of humanity. Like, but I also feel kind of like empty at the end of it. I'm like, fuck, like, because everyone's going back to their jobs. Like these people have these like amazing experiences, and your set changed their life, and then they're like still gonna have conflicts. They're still gonna yell at their girlfriend because they have some masculine traits. That doesn't change by how their musical experience was. So it's nice to get to go home and to kind of like work with people, and it's grounding for me to go from this beautiful celebration of us and humanity to like, okay, tell me about your suicidal thoughts that you've been having over the weekend, because a very different experience than my weekend,
Yeah, it's interesting. Like the kind of music festival can be a kind of peak experience. Doesn't necessarily. I mean, it can be transformative, and
it can be transformative, no doubt.
It's kind of like maybe a both and. It's good to have a peak experience. It's good to have a slow, steady, grounded, looking at yourself, doing that work and that process. And
I fully agree with you, and I think that's a very grounded perspective. It's a both and they come together. It's like that in itself, right? Having a transformative experience that may shine some deep insight into yourself and existence, but it needs to be supplemented, right, with other practices outside of that festival culture that can maintain and help you integrate that experience, which I'm sure you're familiar with, the psychedelic experiences, for example. There can be a lot of insight, but unless it's integrated and processed, then it simply can just have a hedonistic value. It can become a trip of hedonism, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So, yeah. That word integration is my favorite word, probably.
What does that word mean to you?
Oh my God. We're jumping into the deep end here. Because I also just want to appreciate, like, you bringing up this question of self, of identity. And one of my favorite classes, I went to Naropa University. One of my favorite classes there was
I
called,
love Naropa. They're amazing. They're amazing.
yeah, we had this class called Self versus No Self. And we're diving into the question of the self and the teachings on no self from early Buddhism and what that means. And yeah, maybe I don't know. It's something that I've thought a lot about, and it's been interesting when I first got into Buddhism. Like, that idea of no self and those teachings like clicked for me, and they made sense. And then all these years later, working with psychology, it's like a lot of the work I'm doing with people is like, how can we build a healthy, happy self? And that's a lot of the psychology work, I think. And it's that I'm a big fan of the both and. It's not an either or.
Oh man.
And the conclusion of that class, Self and No Self, just to put it out there and put it in a nutshell, kind of is like the real Buddhist teachings wasn't saying definitively there is no self or there is a self. It was, trying to get to a wisdom kind of beyond that kind of transcends and includes, if we want to say it that way. So
I love that. I love that. One of the ways, yeah, I think both and also just being able to hold the tension of opposites, right? Like
yeah,
that, and it's not that. Like being able to live in that space is so powerful, and it's almost like you need more drawers space in your like psyche to be able to like hold it because it's a whole different spaces, and expanding the container. But one of the ways that Goenka talks about in the Vipassana traditions is ultimate reality versus actual reality. So there's this actual reality where Mah is having a conversation with Julian, right? And like we have to kind of exist. And like if a dog is biting my leg, it's not a leg that's being bit because we're all one. It's my fucking leg. Now I better get out of here, right? Like the way like the ego serves as these very basic functional tasks. It's a tool of consciousness. It's an imperfect tool, but it is a tool of consciousness. And at the same time, in the ultimate reality, like we're just these vibrating atoms that like don't make sense and nothing like right. Like they both exist at the same time. And there's one that we can really immediately have a direct experience with, and there's one that we can also have a direct experience with through practice, trance, etc. But there's this beautiful, beautiful speech that I just listened to by Ram Dass.
Oh yeah.
Addressing the APA, which is the American Psychological Association. And it is just freaking, so he's talking to this community of like the top psychologists, people who are in charge of creating the DSM. And it's this beautiful interface, and I'm not going to get into it, but his last really is his thesis in that is like that we have to exist in both end. Like we have like the world is this beautiful, magical place with rainbows and butterflies, and people are dying in Africa, and we need to do something about that. and that is the integration, and I love that. I love that concept of both and.
Yeah, the both and. That's the key to integration for me. It's been a big one. I think our mind tends to go to either or, and black or white, and it's good or bad, or it's me versus you, or whatever. And then there's that so much growth and evolution. Maybe that's not the right word, but I like to use it, or evolution or growth of like that both and can we integrate these different pieces and can they fit together and make sense? And it's also like the perspective we're taking, right? Like from a certain perspective, like you're over there, I'm over here, we're two different people. But if you go to, like you just did, to like the level of atoms or molecules, that doesn't really apply. There's no boundary when we look for it at that level. So it's kind of like, what level are we looking at things? And if someone has some deep insight into how we're formless and interconnected, but they're not able to, pay their taxes on time, I mean, it's not going to work out very well for
them. Yeah, and I think there is a general criticism of the festival culture. I remember when I first went to my first festival, and I was like, wow, all these beautiful people. I was like 18 years old, 17, 18, and it's just like amazing, and all these colorful clothes and all these hippies and all this like beautiful music and all, and it was this idealization, right, with the culture. And I think it's one of these circles that like once you've kind of been in it long enough, you can see the good, and it's like, yeah, buddy, ketamine is used for treatment-resistant depression, and I think the way you're using it right now is not medicinal.
There you go. Yeah. Yeah, we need
like
more people to be able to say that with clarity and strength.
yeah, exactly. It's
Yeah.
easy to get lost in that loop of seeking the alignment without being able to pay your taxes. And hey, like if you want to evade taxes, that's great. I fully support that. I don't support most of the ways that the government is spending money, but there's a way in which I'm seeking safety and security and comfort. And so I think being both and being able to have that, being able to explore that, and in that way, it's like for me, like the music is in psychology my both and. You know, it's
Mhm.
like one of them is rooted in working with suffering and dealing
Yeah.
with stuff and challenging myself and learning more about myself and that. And one is largely, even though the hustle can get hard, luckily I have support now with an agent and management and stuff, but it is a lot of
Yeah.
work. But like it's a joyous occasion for me, you know. It's a thing where I get to go celebrate with people and get to share something that I love doing, and it's being able to exist both in the joy and beauty of humanity and in the darkness and suffering.
Yeah,
You
I
know,
like that. And I appreciate you making the separation. Like they're gonna be two different things for you. They don't have to, yeah,
merge.
they don't have to merge. Yeah. Let
Yeah.
them be their own realm. They can be integrated or connected, but they don't have to be the same thing, obviously. Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate you too bringing up like music. It's not like it's easy to idealize or fantasize about being a musician or a rock star or whatever, but the reality for most people play music, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of stuff to do. And I've just been doing some DJ with guitar playing as a kind of side project, and like it would
Which
be
is
cool to
awesome. Like
like,
I've heard you. Yeah, I've heard you
yeah,
play.
yeah.
Great musician. Yeah.
But like to get that out there and upload things and market and share, and I mean it's a lot of time and energy, and so it's hard to can't do everything. So I appreciate people who are doing it, but I know friends who are musicians who like the blood, sweat, and tears that goes into that moment of being on the stage that people there might not, they don't see all that stuff in the background.
And luck.
And
Element
luck, yeah.
of luck, you know, really, really. And you have to work really hard. But I've seen a lot of people who work really hard, who are incredible musicians, still being breadline. And I've seen a lot of people who are not very incredible musicians, who aren't putting in as much work, you know, hit that right thing with the right algorithm at the right time and all, you know, and it's like that's, you know, it's a very interesting time we live in to be an artist. And I think that as long as it's joyful for you, like for me, it's not about playing bigger festivals. It's not about getting a bigger name. It's not about, for me, it's about becoming a better and better and better musician and being able to hopefully play for more people, right? Usually playing for more people does equate with those things, but that's the way that I, you know, in a lot of ways, keep myself from burning out. And I will say I'm going to give some big love in terms of this music thing to my homie Will Magid, who started the Balkan Bump project. I played with pretty intensely for about 3 years. I'm not playing with that project currently as much, but I learned a lot being on the road with him. You know, and one of the things is that, and this kind of applies to everything in life, is like he maintained this kind of equanimity of mind. Like you know, we'd play some show in Chicago, and there wasn't like a huge turnout. He'd be like pretty chill about everything. And then like 2 months later, we're playing Red Rocks opening for Grammatic, and after the show, he's like he's stoked, but I'm like, man, now I'm just like elated, you know, like holy fuck, he's played Red Rocks, you know, he's just like, you know, I'm like. Well, he's like, yeah, it's just like, you know, I'm just thinking about how it could be better, like how, you know, and like how could I do it, you know, how could this show be better? I'm just running through the show and like, and what he was kind of saying underneath in between the lines was like, it's you know it's important to recognize that like okay you know if you get these expansions and contractions it just you just kind of get burnt out on the whole thing so okay yeah Red Rocks that's great awesome that was fun and the next show might be you know some random town that we've never played in with 30 people but if you go through right so it's like something good happens like oh my god this is the best thing I love her she's gonna be the best thing of my whole life and then 2 weeks later, she like is like, I don't want to be your girlfriend or your whatever. And then you're like, oh my god, like there's this
Hmm.
right when you don't maintain that equanimity,
I
right? And
love
I
that.
think
It's a
the
great message.
hardest thing with music, the hardest thing with music is you get something, everyone engages, everyone listens, and the next song you put out, no one engages. So how do you maintain equanimity? The musicians who succeed are the ones that keep pushing even when they're not being successful. Yeah.
I love
So
that. Yeah.
yeah.
That's so good to hear. Yeah. It's easy to get in this big ups and downs, and I think that applies to so much in life, but especially when you're putting something out there for the public. And you're raising an interesting point about what takes off or becomes popular, and like the gravitational pull to chase that, right? To want that. And then you've lost touch with maybe the original reason why you started it to some degree. I mean, if you're making something just because it's going to get more clicks, like that's not a very good motivation. We need to kind of check that. Might not take you in a very good place in the long run, right? Because there's a lot of ways to get attention online and they're not all good. Yeah.
Absolutely. Intention is important. Intention is definitely important, and we live in a time and world where you know, it's about image. It's like
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
funny, like my Persian family. When I go home, they're like, "Man, we see you playing all these shows. Like, you only have like 5,000 followers on Instagram. Like, you need it. Aren't you supposed? Like, if you're playing, aren't you supposed to have a lot more?" And like, most of these people that are looking at it, you pay $100, you can have 100,000 followers, overnight. It's not about the numbers, right? It's about the quality of the people who are following. It's about the quality of the engagement. And it doesn't turn into anything. It has nothing to do with shows. What has anything to do with shows is how much you've played and how many people come to your live shows. People can have millions of followers on Spotify and play in San Francisco and have 50 people show up. So the number of streams, all these things don't necessarily equate.
Interesting.
Image, right? It's about image. If I say I have 300 CCA, oh, he's got 300,000 followers on Spotify. Like, doesn't say anything about how good your music is, what your intention is, how pure your intention is, whether somebody else made that song as a ghost producer and you paid them.
That's
It's
right.
just right. So image is such an important fucking part of this reality of any art, not just music, any art, anyone who's doing art. If you don't have a certain amount of followers, you don't have a certain amount of engagement with your content, you're deemed, right? Unworthy, including my own self, man. This is how wild this shit is. I can understand that. And my buddy named me and said, "Oh, this guy's super dope." And I looked him up on Instagram. I was like, "He's got 300 followers." And I was like, "I don't know about this guy." And I listened to music. And I was like, "Holy shit!" Like, just seeing my own process, how I so quickly can devalue someone's art based on the lack of engagement because they don't fucking want to put content out. They don't want to play that game. They don't want to have to do a weekly post or a daily post, But it doesn't change the quality of their art. That's important to remember.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great message to share. So true. Yeah, the world's more and more confusing. And with a lot of popular music, like I think it's interesting to just like step back and like, yeah, who produced what, like how many names are listed on the song credits, like who's the actual musician here versus like a kind of frontman figure. Not that it's bad, but it's a bit of a it's confusing to say the least because you don't really know.
It's confusing, and it's the same thing as you understand in the academic world, right? If there's a research article, there's a bunch of names on the top, and the first author means that they did the most work. But if you're working in anyone's lab, they just have to be listed even if they didn't do anything. So there's ways in which the concept of taking credit. And then the last thing I'll say is like there's this fear with the AI music, right? Like AI music's coming, they're gonna take it away and for the musicians. And I'm like, I'm super fascinated and stoked by AI music. So I'm like, how can I integrate with it? How can I figure out how to like work with it, right? How can I like have it do these things and be able to like go in and jump in and be able to have this relationship with it? Because for me, it's fascinating that this is an algorithmic mind through CPU computation that is able to it just shows the beauty of the amalgamation, that all creativity is an amalgamation, and there can be kind of an algorithm to it, right? And so I think it's beautiful in some ways that like shows to me the humility that we need to have as artists. Is like, yo, man, everything you're doing is an amalgamation of all these other people that have come before you. This song that you're calling yours, you probably had another reference track that you were listening to be able to model your song off of, right? So this concept of ownership, this ties in through everything we're talking, whether it's culture, whether it's, it's like, this is mine, it's like, how do we move away from these concepts of ownership, right, to more collective ways of understanding, to being able to really honestly give credit to where credit is due, and being able to just recognize that like what we put in has a long lineage. What we create has a long lineage of other humans and forces of nature, things that have helped us to get to that point, right? And have a humility about the creation as opposed to an ownership of, oh, you made this song. It's like, yeah, didn't come through me either. I didn't channel fucking hum and raw or some shit on this song. Like, I worked and I learned and I spent 15 years studying sitar and practicing 6 hours a day. But like I'm not, but it was all the raga, all the teachers, all the people, there's a moment in that creation that they're there. It's not just mine. And so it's about having more of a collective relationship to expression and to art and to ownership than a very individualistic approach.
I like that. Yeah. Yeah. And to give credit and honor them. Yeah. That's beautiful. It's a good perspective. It takes some of the pressure off too. It's more honest.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So you're excited about AI music. That's cool to hear.
Super excited about it. I'm so, because I hope it just makes us better musicians. It's like, all right, cool, man. Everyone's just doing that. Like, oh, here's my new song. It's like, well, that chord is exactly like the chords from, this one Beatles song, and then the words sound a lot like, like we're always in this idea. And I think I hope there's so much mediocre music, in my opinion, my humble opinion. And there's also so much good music. There's so much excellent fucking music, and that's the problem. It's like there's so much shit out there. And you're just like every day you're just like, oh my god, that's amazing, that's amazing. But then there's also this whole thing that's kind of like, okay. And what I really hope that AI music does is it takes out more of just the mediocrity, the stuff that's just kind of a paste and repeat of something else, and it forces us to become better musicians. It shows us where the algorithms are. It shows us where and how it's saying, okay, how can we go beyond that? So that's my hope, and how we interact with it. It's not going to go away. Whether I like it or not, AI music is here, baby. AI is here. It doesn't matter whether I like it or not. How am I going to relate to it? Can I be critical of it? I can. Am I in some ways? Sometimes. But mostly I'm curious. Mostly I'm really, really curious. How can I have a relationship with it that is the right relationship that could be and I think that will be the ultimate question for humanity as we move deeper and deeper into these ages of technology. It's not about liking or disliking, is what kind of a relationship do we decide to have with it?
Yeah, that's a good way to say it. Yeah, it's so true. It can be used for good or ill, right? Like you were saying, music can be used to motivate people to go to war or to sync us up the troops.
Absolutely. It's like mindfulness, right? It's like that's the exact same thing. It's like it can create a really better killer that's more present. It has a lower heart rate while they're like got the sniper, or it can make you like much more calm as a first responder, like when you're going out and dealing with trauma, and so how do we use these practices? How do we interface with these different technologies? Mindfulness is a technology also.
Yeah. Well, here's a question for you, just your thoughts on it as a musician, as an artist. I guess it's a question of quality versus quantity. I mean, it seems like there's a pressure to just keep putting out a lot of stuff, a lot of content, and that might be some of the mediocrity you're talking about. But if you don't, then you feel like you're getting forgotten about or something like that, or getting lost.
It's a very good point. It's a very astute observation. I think there is a parallel to this reality in the world I come from, in academia. The world you come from is called publish or perish.
Yes.
Meaning you don't publish a certain amount of content, especially like at a UC and UC Santa Barbara, UC California, Santa Barbara. We were a tier 1 research university, meaning that most of the funding and money that was made in that university was through research. So there was extreme pressure on all the grad students to continuously publish, or else is called publish or perish. So in some ways, that concept has now applied to music content creating, largely because of the Spotify algorithms. They're based in continuity. Same with Instagram. Instagram rewards you for continuity. Right? That's one of the things about algorithms. They tend to reward the person who creates kind of the same exact piece of work every single day. If you do it every single day, kind of the same thing, a little bit different, it rewards you. So Spotify is the same thing, to where if you have one song coming out a month, the chances of the algorithm putting you on editorial playlists and stuff increases. And so you're absolutely right that I think it does diminish the content right? So when like these albums were like, I'm a huge Pink Floyd fan, you know, the
Yeah.
concept albums they would make, you know, and spend years like creating this
Yeah.
amazing piece, right? That you can have this relationship to, you know, like, oh man, metal, you know, that album Meddlu, or where like there's like 5 tracks and then the back was just echoes. It's a 25-minute epic piece of music. Like now, you know, music can be more than, you know, you don't want it to be longer than 3 or 4 minutes. You know, it's like making it shorter and shorter because attention spans are limited. And so it's this interesting reality of interfacing with technology and what kind of a relationship do you want to have with it, you know? That's the question. Like these algorithms have a mind of their own, you know, and do you choose to like interface with it and honor it, you know, and just be like, okay, this is just what I'm going to do. And maybe in some ways it makes you a more consistent producer or musician because now you're like, shit, I got to put a song out every month. But I think that you're absolutely right that that pressure does diminish some of the quality and does lead to some mediocrity for sure. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And it's not just music, it's academia, but it's writing, it's, I don't know, videos, posts, YouTubes, it's all the, I just feel, I just have this sense of like, we're in this age of information and it's like the water's rising and it's almost like a tidal wave coming in. And there's just so much, on the one hand, it's beautiful, like so much being produced and created and written. But on the other hand, it's like no one can keep up with it all. And it's hard to get, you know, this, it's hard to hear the signal through the noise because there's just so much out there. Um, and so sometimes when I go down that rabbit hole, it's like, what's the point? But then, you know, on the other hand, it's like we're alive, we're creative beings, we can express ourselves and have fun with it
It's
and
the
share
both
it.
end.
Yeah.
It's the both end, right? I mean, on the deep level, sometimes I'm like, dude, and I'm like, existentially, this has no value. And within the long, I feel like have impermanent, you know, reality and search. But to what you're speaking to, like technology has always modified the way that art is created and presented. Okay, so British wax cylinder, first recording device, 1876 or something like that. It was a big wax fucking cylinder, and basically had this little thing, right, that would etch, you know, the vibrations of the music, and then you could go play it in basically some version of a wax player. And they took it to India. India was one of the first places outside of Britain in the Western world that was recorded because it was a British colony. So they took this wax cylinder and went to these like Indian musicians. So raga, or the rag Yaman back then, especially still to this day, can at least be an hour, usually 3 hours. Like an hour to 3 hours is a rag, right? So they go to these musicians like, first of all, it was freaking scary. They're like, yo, we're gonna like, you're gonna play, I'm gonna have this weird wax thing do this, and I'm gonna take this to the queen, and they're gonna be able to hear your music. And so it's very much like, are you stealing my music? Are you stealing? Like, it was scary. So what they would do, and they were like, by the way, you only have 3 minutes and 32 seconds, because that's how much time a British wax cylinder could hold. That was
Yeah.
which is actually the average time of a pop song now. It's three
No
minutes,
way.
2 seconds.
That's wild.
But it's always, and so what they would do is, so like, okay, here's a rag. You have 3 minutes and 32 seconds to play a rag. So they say rag, they would call it rag pilu. And they play it at the very end, they would yell their name. And I am gone. This is because they wanted to have credit. Like
Oh, nice.
and all these
The shout out.
recordings, yeah, exactly, shouting out to themselves because like, I want, this is my music. Is it going to get stolen? Like, what's going to happen to this, you know? And so it was fascinating, but it's an example. Or folk ballads would be 20, 25 minutes long. They were like basically a moving troubadour was a moving journalist,
Hmm.
and then the folk songs like these crazy long ballads. And it's like, okay, you got 3 minutes and 32 seconds. What did you got? You know, and so the concept of a song was even mediated by the technology. And so
That's
this is
fascinating. Yeah.
not a new reality for us. Yeah.
That's really cool to think about in the past 200 years ago or whatever, more than that, like the 3 minute song wasn't, you know, I didn't have that idea. That wasn't a, yeah,
No,
makes
like
sense.
Beethoven's
Yeah.
Fifth or whatever the hell, man. Like these things were just these huge concepts, right? Or like
Huh.
this journey music. You know, this journey music.
Yeah, that's right. Well, beautiful. It's been such a pleasure to have you on the podcast. This is amazing.
It's been awesome, man. Thank you so much. I don't get to do these things very often, and it's a real pleasure. It's awesome that you're doing it, and you know, I think it's one thing I really appreciate with your approach is the eclecticism of like you know, you can bring people from the mental health thing, people from the music thing, people from I think that's really important, is to diversify the kinds of information and explorations and conversations that you have. So super
Thank
grateful for
you.
that.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. Yeah, yeah.
Thanks for saying that. People often ask me, "Oh, what's your podcast about?" And it's like you're supposed to have this little elevator pitch for everything in life, and I don't like that. I never fully resonated with that, So this
Yeah,
podcast is a good example. Why I
yeah,
got into podcasting was I love the long conversations. I love the 2 hour long deep dive with
yeah.
some scientists you've never heard of, and yeah.
That's awesome. That's so awesome. Yeah, you got a great voice for it. So. I'm rocking. Yeah, it's awesome.
Well, I'm going to link to all your stuff below, and you can share links to me. Anything you want to share with people who are listening?
Thank you for tuning in, for listening, and checking out this podcast. Feel free to follow me. Check out my content. I have stuff on YouTube and Spotify and Instagram. It's Mah Ze Tar, MAH, which means moon, and then ZE, and then TAR, Mah Ze Tar. And you could see a list of my shows and stuff coming up. I'm doing a little tour right now in California, Oregon, and Arizona in the next month, and so come out and check it out if you're around, and hope to see some of y'all out there in the real world.
Nice. Love it. Thanks.
Right up.